Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. As you know, this is a show about astrology, and astrology seems to be one of the more relevant sciences and art forms today because of what we're seeing in the charts, what we're seeing in the skies, what we're seeing on the planet itself. The events seem to be mirroring each other very nicely, which really validates, in my mind, the way astrology works. Got a great guest coming on who has a Vedic as well as Western astrology view. And before we get started, I want to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon. In there, you'll find a couple of paragraphs of Western mundane astrology, as well as the signs following that. I also have links in there to my podcast, my art, and everything else that I do is there. And I also want to make sure that you guys know that I do readings for people. If you want to, you can find them on my website, chrisflisher.com or turningofthewheel.com. And I'm always there to help you with a wide array of different kinds of readings, from synastry to career to owner's manual, the whole show. So just check that out if you want to, and that's helpful. And also in my newsletter is a donate button if you care to donate for my services. I was just telling my guest that this is my 14th year of being on the air, and it seems hard to believe that it's been that long, but that works for me, and I'm happy to see that it's still going strong. So it's good to do that. My guest today is the one and only Ronnie Dreyer. She's out of New York City. Her website is RonnieDreyer, Ronnie Dreyer, and she's best known as a Vedic astrologer, but she's got a wider range of skills in both Western and Vedic astrology. We'll be talking today about what we see on the sky coming up and the eclipses that are coming up, so it's quite a bit to talk about. So welcome to the show, Ronnie. It's always great to have you on.
It's always great to be here, Chris, so
Yeah.
I hope everybody is well and safe in our audience, and I know you're doing okay. So
yeah,
I'm
we do the
happy
best
about
we
that.
can under the circumstances. I guess it's just a little bit awkward. We have this time of trial, but what I find to be most revealing about it is how the planet itself is responding to what we're doing here. With all of us being out of the sort of the fray, the planet has really responded in a very positive way, which might be the greater message of the whole thing going on. Who knows, right?
For sure.
It does seem odd in that regard. So we have a couple of big eclipses coming up over the course of the summer, and I know I've had you on in the past because you've always had a good view of the eclipses and what you're thinking about them, and sort of the general sort of what do you see as the underlying sort of message that might be handed down as a result of the eclipses, or something along those lines. The first one is coming up in June the 5th. It's a lunar eclipse at 15 degrees Sagittarius, which is we've moved into the nodes in a different fashion now. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about that one coming up.
Right. So this has been a really crazy year,
Right.
and I think that most of us who have watched the sky for many years have been pointing to this year, because of Saturn, Pluto, and once I started to really look into this year, I realized that Saturn, Pluto was just one of many things.
One of many, yeah.
One of many, and I'm an eclipse watcher, and for me, the nodes and the eclipses are so telling, and it goes even way beyond zodiacs, because even though you can say, okay, this eclipse is in, Cancer or Gemini, if you do sidereal, for me, it's a matter of where the planets are, and this year started, I think, for me, the solar eclipse of December 26, 2019 really started it because we had the sun and moon and Jupiter very close to each other. When you have a total eclipse or an annular eclipse, the nodes are very close. And then we had Mars and the South Node conjoining and hitting, that eclipse degree in February and March. So that to me was already, something that you had to look at, because when you look at this 19-year, which I look at a lot, the Metonic cycle, the last series of eclipses that occurred were in 2001 on exactly the same, the same date. So we get, December 26th, and then We get January 10th, the lunar, that also occurred in 2001. Coming up, we have June 21st and July 5th, also occurred in 2001. And we also, of course, start with June 5th because we have three. Normally we have two, but this summer we have three. And, I mean, we've had three before. This is not, like, out of the ordinary. But the thing about these eclipses is that they are just all in the same realm, as where, the planets are with, the signs of the eclipses of 2001. So that's, for me, the first thing to look at. Is it going to mirror 2001? Now, of course, 2001, whenever you say that year, people think, yes, 9/11,
Right.
What happened on 9/11? Well, on 9/11, we had Mars and Ketu, or Mars and the South Node, at the same degree as that eclipse of June 21st. And June 21st is the solstice. So does that matter?
Yeah, no
that
kidding.
We're going to have an eclipse on the same day as a solstice. And, according to ancients, some ancient texts, it does matter because the solstice is a power point,
Very
it's
much
a powerful
so.
point
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
in the sky. And we have repetition of eclipses, of course, every 19 years. There's like a series of maybe 19 years and 19 years and 19 years, and then it stops, and they repeat themselves. So we do have that, this year, and we also have the fact that the Ketu and Mars, they were already, on the eclipse of December 26th, but that one is, of course, going to be opposite to the one on, June 21st. So that's the one I'm really looking at because that's the solar eclipse.
Right, that's at 0 degrees Cancer. Yeah.
Yeah, and that one is going to be right on the solstice. And we have to also remember that when we have the winter solstice, that's going to be the date of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So
Right.
we have two solstices this year, which not only mirror solstices but have events. You know what I mean? Celestial events that are happening. So that's why this year is so dynamic.
It's very dynamic. It's a real
so
year
much-
of change. I mean, there's no question about it. It's a year of change, and it seems as if it's a year of revelation of some sort, whereby we have to take heed of what the cosmos is saying to us in so many words. I mean, there are some clear markers. Some seems like there's sort of a revealing events that are taking place that sort of are forcing us to rethink where we are, which really does make sense. I mean, I've always interpreted the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto conjunction as large being Jupiter, responsible meaning Saturn, and reconstruction meaning Pluto. So large, responsible reconstruction. That's sort of what we're going through because we're changing the way we're living right now. And,
Right,
in
exactly.
in all forms. And it's going to probably ripple on because we think about large events and the money that's being made on large events. I mean, just the sporting industry alone has come to a grinding halt. And there's so much money that's involved with that. It's just staggering to how they would have to reinvent that, or concerts for that matter, or the opera, or the theater, or anything like that. Anywhere there's places, restaurants, wherever there's large gatherings, we all have to rethink how those are taking place. So this really is a time for a wake-up call, a major correction of some sort.
Right, exactly. And I mean, the whole idea of these metonic cycles, when you're looking at, and again, you can, whatever you used or anybody used to see this year as being a crazy year, of course, the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto conglomeration, and that repeated from somewhere in the 1300s. And so, André Barbeau, for instance, really did predict a pandemic for these years. A lot of astrologers predicted haywire things, financial markets collapsing. I mean, we all did. I don't think many of us really thought pandemic, but, people did think it was going to be a crazy, crazy year. And I think that whatever you use to see that, will have that effect. And I think that the eclipse structure, when you're dealing with three eclipses, one after the other, June 5th and June 5th and then June 21st and then July 5th, what you're getting is, the whole idea of, first of all, the June 21st eclipse that's on a solstice, and the fact that it is a total, an annular eclipse, which means the node is very close to the eclipse. It's within 1 degree. You can get it within 1 to 5 degrees, but this one is super close. And because it's on that solstice point, it's very powerful. And then you also get the July 5th eclipse, which we know is the date of the birthday of America.
Right.
And it doesn't really matter, what time it was. I know people obsess about about, oh, what time was America's chart. The thing that's important is that we celebrate America's birthday on July 4th. And so that's the date. And in fact, that was, again, when you go back to 2001, it was an international event. It took place in America. It affected the Pentagon and the Trade Center, but it was international. It affected people of all countries. The result of that was the Afghan war that our allies in Europe helped us with. And as Gary O'Toole, a Vedic astrologer who also does a podcast, and I talked to him last week, he pointed out to me that that of course we know that it changed. Not only did it change the nature of flying, but it changed the nature of it for forever in terms of now we still have to watch how much liquid we take on the plane.
Of course,
and even though, you know what I mean, some of the restrictions have lifted a little bit, but still it changed everything. So in a way, it's kind of like what's happening now. We have all these restrictions, and slowly but surely, they might be lifted up a little bit. But still, it's going to change the face of how we communicate for years to come.
And that's really the biggest message, I think. I always, the concept of time, and I always use the analogy of a corkscrew. A corkscrew, time is like a corkscrew. It's going around and around. It has the same cycle of going around. The cyclical revolution is still the same, but you're down the road at a further place in time. So events and contexts have changed. So what happened in 2001 was a shift in the way our society moves, and now we're in this different time and place where a similar type of theme is there. This is the cyclical nature of astrology that I find to be so fascinating, because it's not so much that we're going to have another 9/11, but it's more the fact that we're changing the way we live, and these are the greater pictures, which is the theme that you drove up from the September 11th, which is the same idea. Things change from that point going forward, just as they do as we are now in the midst of this change now. So it's maybe nature's way of sort of, culling the herd, so to speak, or natural selection. That all could be part of it. We are a planet that is far too overpopulated, and that may be just part of what this is all about. I don't know. I don't have the breadth of knowledge to address that, but it is an interesting theory.
Yeah, it is an interesting theory, and I remember also when we had the AIDS crisis, which is also kind of around the time we had eclipses in these signs and degrees as well. People would say, oh, well, we haven't had a major war in ages. And this is kind of, a way that nature is sort of eliminating a huge part of the population, especially.
War is different. We are in a war, actually. I mean, I think it's just a different kind of war. I mean, we're fighting a virus that is, we can't see. It's an invisible enemy. And the one thing about it that's interesting is that in some ways, it affects everybody. It affects everybody on the planet. And as a result of that, it has a unifying quality to it, which I think, rather than reverting to a sort of an arms race or an arms war where you're actually using machines and guns and bodies, now we're pulling back in a different form of war. But the struggle is still evident. That's the point. I think that's great to understand. The struggle is still evident.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, and that's why, eclipses, to me, even though they happen every 6 months, it really depends on the nature of eclipses. So especially since I think the one December 26th, really started a lot of it, because that one, if you look at that chart, Jupiter was combust. Now, a lot of people were saying, oh, Sun and Jupiter together. And I was sort of because I'm, schooled in a lot of ancient astrology, I said, wait a minute. If you look in the classical texts about eclipses, they don't like the fact that there is something like Jupiter combust.
Right.
Because Jupiter represents ministers, it represents leaders, it represents, in the Vedic text I look at, Triya Samhita, it says horses. So the point is that eclipse was something that I thought, I'm not sure I like that combust Jupiter. Now, of course, we like to see the signs. In Western astrology, Jupiter already was in Capricorn, but in Indian astrology, it was already in Sagittarius. And to me, it didn't even make a difference, because it still meant the quality of Jupiter, was getting combust. And then if we went back to 2008, 2009, we go back to that crisis, which is 12 years ago, and so the Jupiter cycle is repeating itself. So really, financially, we're also in the same situation we were in 2008, 2009.
Which was the housing crisis when everything, exactly, yeah. And what's interesting about...
we had a worldwide recession.
Yeah, and the banking industry is one of the things. So, like you mentioned, we were many astrologers, myself, and I wrote an article back in, I think it was 2008, about this time coming up. And I mentioned that, we didn't know if it was going to be a war. We didn't know if it was going to be a financial collapse. We didn't know if it was going to be a political upheaval. It turns out that it's all three, if you think about it. I mean,
It's all three, exactly. And I mean, we're not done with it. I mean, we're
No.
not done with it because we have, first of all, Mars retrograding, and where Mars is in terms of, it's going to retrograde through tropical Aries, and it's going
Right.
to be there for, 6 months. In the Indian system, it's going to be in tropical Aries and Pisces. But I think the more important aspect of that is it's going to be forming a square
Right.
to the Saturn-Pluto. So whenever we think, we're getting free of all of this, come, September when Mars retrogrades and August when it starts to really go through those degrees, it's going to, we're going to have to think about what's going on there as well. And then we have the Jupiter-Pluto 3 times. So this whole year, it's like my eyes get tired looking
Oh, I know.
at everything.
It's so hard so hard to digest. And and what's interesting about it is that we haven't really learned the lessons of what happened in 1918, because the same sort of scenario did unfold. They sort of thought everything was fine, and they let people back out, and before you know it, it came back with a vengeance, and it wreaked much more damage than it did. So we haven't learned from that. We're so desperate for the economy, but I understand the economic problems here, but we have to also be mindful. And the thing about Jupiter, one thing what you mentioned about Jupiter is absolutely right, but I also think of Jupiter as an amplifier, so it sort of expands whatever is in the midst. It's in the midst of it. It sort of brings that sense of amplification, so that things all get larger and more fraught. And if we thought this time was bad, what would it be like if we had to spend a year in quarantine? What would that be like? I mean, how would we even survive it? I mean, what would air travel be like?
Well, I think the interesting thing is after 9/11, I mean, especially because I live in New York, so that was really affected. Businesses changed. A lot of things changed. And, of course, now they're talking about the fact that everything is going to change. And all the things that we've been sort of looking at anyway the past 10 years, that more people have been working at home remotely, more people have been doing distance learning in schools. So that was anyway going to develop, but now it's happening at a faster pace.
Well, it needed the forcing function of this to happen in order to do that. But that's going to change the way corporations view how they rent. I mean, if you have people who are able to do their jobs at home, you have no longer got the congestion of the traffic back and forth, no longer subway lines, crowded trains, cars coming into cities, and then they have these enormous real estate buildings that they're paying enormous rents on to keep these workers housed. And if they're all working at home, think of the money they'll save. It'll change the whole way we work. And that's why Zoom and Skype and everything else will be different.
Well, that's what I thought immediately. I thought, well, especially in New York City, real estate's going to go down because people are going to – it happened in 9/11, too, on a different basis, because there were a lot of businesses that worked near the Trade Center. And they just had to close up. And a lot of them, unfortunately, restaurants closed up, but then there were a lot of businesses that simply moved out of New York City. So they moved to other places. Now, here it's going to be the same thing. People are going to get rid of office space because they're not going to need it. Exactly. And they're not going to have those crowded subways. And you still are going to have New Yorkers who have to go to work in the city. But it is going to even it out. And I think that it's also going to add to more migration, all over the place. People are already looking to leave, crowded cities because of this. Twitter just announced that people can work at home forever.
I saw
Google
that.
is, Google is saying you can come one day a week. So a lot of people may find also in a place like Silicon Valley, where the real estate prices are exorbitant, they might find that they don't have to live there anymore, to be like part of Google and Facebook and
So that'll
Apple
be a major correction, and things will all happen virtually. And the fact that social media is there, social media really has been the saving grace of many people, because it's sort of the only outreach we have to do that. So that tool's already in place. So it really does set the stage for this whole new paradigm shift of how we work and how we communicate. And there's still people who have to have the sub shops and the hard goods and the clothing stores, but even the big clothing stores are closing. I mean, J.C. Penney's filing for bankruptcy. Among others.
Well, that probably would have been in bankruptcy anyway.
Oh, I agree.
Because
I agree.
Of the,
yeah.
But it's speeding things up, of course. I mean, and I think it's also when you have, when I do all these conjunctions and then the eclipses, and it's really kind of bringing things to light. I think that we're already there. When I look at eclipses, that's kind of what I look at. And the thing is that when you go back to the, when they repeat themselves. I was doing the repeating, and I always look at that metonic cycle. So I did look at 2001, pretty carefully, that suddenly we found out all about, the terrorism and the different groups of terrorists and how they were able to, plan their activities. But the interesting thing is that, of course, when I always do a year ahead class, and the one this year that I was really looking at a lot was Jupiter-Pluto. And the reason I was looking at Jupiter-Pluto, in addition to Saturn-Pluto, was because this was the first time since 1955 and 56 that Jupiter-Pluto conjoined 3 times because Jupiter and Pluto were retrograde.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So usually, they will occur maybe every 12 or 13 years. But this time it was the 3. And the last time that happened was 55, 56. So I went back to 55, 56 when I did this class of mine in December. And that was every year is a lot of activity, but that was an extraordinary year for politics and borders. It was the Suez Canal crisis,
right,
and the whole rebuilding of the Middle East and Britain leaving, and then also it was in the end of 55, Vietnam. It was really the start of the Vietnam War.
And Korean War at the same time.
As well. But that was the Vietnam was real. That was the real start of the Vietnam War,
right.
55, 56. We had the Hungarian Revolution in 56. So I kept thinking Jupiter-Pluto is going to change borders. We're going to have leadership changes this year, which still could happen, of course. And I'm not just talking about America. I'm really talking about on a global scale.
Of course.
And I think that's going to happen. And then when I was looking now to prepare for this class, something I hadn't done then because I was focused on Jupiter-Pluto was I realized that the other year, in fact, that we had these eclipses on similar dates was, in fact, 1955. And in 1955, now we do have a lot of eclipses over the years on like July 5th, July 6th, of course. But in 1955, we had an eclipse on June 5th, we had an eclipse on June 20th, and we had an eclipse on December 14th, which we're going to have this coming December. That's going to be a major eclipse. Now, the difference this year, all the solar eclipses were total, so that's total or annular. So that's why it's an intense year. December 26th this year, June 21st, and then December 14th. And you always get the solar lunar in the Metonic cycle being the same. But 55, 56, we had these eclipses in addition to the Jupiter-Pluto. And I really realized also that Salk came up with his polio vaccine in 1955. Mm-hmm. So the other thing was that, we are comparing all this to the pandemic of 1918. But, for those of us like me and you who are old people who grew up in the 1950s,
right.
We remember polio, and we remember the polio vaccine.
I remember we used to have it come out of a little sugar cube. Remember that, yeah.
Yes,
mm-hmm.
But the first one was a really big injection. It was a really big shot.
Mm-hmm.
And
terrifying,
maybe you're a little younger than me.
Yeah,
it was horrible.
Right.
It was so horrible. And then a few years later, they came out with the sugar pill, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody had to stand in line at the nurse's office.
I remember that like it was yesterday. I really do remember.
I know.
It's just hard to believe.
I know.
And that was a major. That was sort of a way that shifted the way. That could have been a pandemic if it hadn't been.
Well, polio was major. I think it's hard for people who were born later on to have that framework. But, I remember kids in my classes, having limps or having braces.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, and in the summer, it was a big thing, like you couldn't go to swimming pools. I was born a bit after that, so I wasn't, I was born like during that time when they had the vaccine. But prior to that, over many years, it was every summer.
Yeah,
that people were,
and of course we had a president. We had a president who was crippled by it. So that's the other thing.
Exactly.
That's a very.
So we really had many years of polio. It wasn't something that when that vaccine came out, it wasn't overnight.
No.
He was, testing it out for quite a while. But I thought it was interesting that 55, 56 seems to also be this thing of eclipses bringing things to light. And I do feel that June and July we're going to have a lot of things that are going to be made public in terms of vaccines and in terms of medicine. I'm not saying that they're going to be in their final form, not by any stretch of the imagination, right. Because we have all those crazy aspects coming up in the fall, with Mars, squaring everything, and then we have Jupiter-Pluto, and then finally we have Jupiter-Saturn at the end of the year. But, one of those Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions is going to be at the same degree as Jupiter-Saturn. I mean, Saturn-Pluto.
Well, what I find
January.
interesting is the fact that the eclipse that's happening on July 4th, which is, supposed to be our Independence Day, really does fall exactly right on the sun of the United States, which I think in some ways must be revealing of some sort of thing. I mean, naturally, the United States is an important country, but we're not the whole world. But a lot of the world's policies and response is a result of what happens in the United States, and because so our footprint is so large there, so the reverberations of what happens to us really can resonate out for the rest of the other parts of the world, and it is going to be interesting to see how that changes because. The fact that the borders are being closed down, and it changes the whole sort of underlying thesis of what America stands for. Sort of our whole modus operandi is to give me you're tired, you're poor, you're sheltered. All that disappears in some ways because we have this, not only is the administration against that, but we have these eclipses and the pandemics are shutting our borders down in ways that are really interesting. I think that the United States has reached a peak on a greater picture of sort of hitting its peak of authority and perhaps has hit the peak of its authority and will now suffer a lesser standing on the platform of the world in some regard.
Well, it's interesting. As you say, I was saying before, I digress a lot because there's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
But the July 5th, but definitely when you have these eclipses, on July 4th or 5th, like in 2001, the 2001 eclipse, was, very, very, very important for, what happened later on. And the June 21st eclipse was the one where Mars and South Node hit that degree in September, on September 11th. Now, right now, and whenever you have a birthday, for instance, on an eclipse, or the eclipse is, in your sign, but especially if you have a birthday on an eclipse, it's a real strong year for you. It could be very powerful. Mm-hmm. It could be that you become, to the public notices you. It could also be that you have a passing or a transition in your family.
Yeah.
And June 21st is interesting because that eclipse, because it's an annular eclipse, it's very tight. It means that the North Node already hit that eclipse degree on April 25th. So we are now in that sort of eclipse span, which I always look at between the node and the eclipse. So right now, the effects of the June 21st eclipse started really April 25th, about that time. And then it's going to climax, kind of in June. So I also find it interesting that, certain figures, people last year were saying, well, what do you think about Elizabeth Warren? Because she's born on June 21st.
Right. Yep.
She has her year is an eclipse year. I said, well, at that time, Biden wasn't the candidate. I said, well, I don't know if she's going to be the candidate, but whatever happens, she's going to be very important,
And she is being very important because she's shifting the platform for the party. So there's something that's going on there. So,
exactly.
And she's in contention as a running mate, and possibly is probably the most likely one. The only real caveat to that is that if she leaves the state of, you have to ask yourself, is she more valuable in the Senate than she is as a vice president? And that's the problem because we have a Republican governor in Massachusetts, even though it's a blue state. We have a Republican governor. And he would likely appoint a Republican. We don't know that. Anyway, it's really fascinating to watch this stuff and to see the connections. I mean, if anybody ever has any doubts about astrology, these sort of events would really put them to sleep because this is just amazing to see this precision. And it's just incredible to see, regardless of what lens you look through, whether you look through the Western lens or you look through the Vedic lens, the precision is there. It's a mathematical construct, and when you see these things lining up by degree, you can't help but drop your jaw and say, wow, this is really phenomenal, especially when you're taking the metonic cycles. We're talking today with Ronnie Dreyer. Her website is ronniedreyer.com, RONNIEDREYER.com. She's got a wealth of information on her site. She does fantastic readings. I encourage you to look up her site. We're going to take a quick break right here. We'll be back in about 2.5 minutes. But in the meantime, be sure to check out Ronnie's website, ronniedreyer.com, RONNIEDREYER.com. And we'll be back in about 2 minutes. So hang in there, folks, and we'll continue our conversation. What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color. Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. My guest today is the one and only Ronnie Dreyer. She's an astrologer out of New York City and is deep in the thick of it. And we're talking about the eclipse cycles coming up, some of which are really fascinating. And they do have a direct parallel back to 18 or so, roughly 18 years ago in 2001 when they were in the similar position. And we're seeing a sort of similar theme. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, time is like a corkscrew. So think of the corkscrew in your head. And the corkscrew is going around and around, but it's always moving forward. And as it spins, cycles come back to the same spot where they were before, but they're in a different place in time. So once the context changes, the events will change and as a result. So here we are back at a time with these eclipses coming up. We're in the middle of just opening up our doors as a result of a 2 or 3 month lockdown due to a pandemic. And the big question everybody has, including the scientists, and I think the astrology certainly maps up with it, that now we're entering into a period where we have 4 planets retrograde. Most notably, Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn are moving backwards again into the range of degree where they were when we first discovered the pandemic. So what does that mean in September, October? Does that mean a recurrence? This is all speculation, of course, but I think it's a worthy conversation. And I'm just curious what you think, Ronnie.
Yeah, well, can I just go back 1 minute to that eclipse of June 21st? Because the other point I wanted to make, which is very fascinating, like you said, we are living under one sky, so it's not just New York or Washington that's affected; it's the whole world. But that June 21st, and I was talking about people's birthdays, the person to watch, of course, in the next year is going to be Prince William, because he was born on June 21st, 1982, which was an eclipse. So he is going to be 38. So you get that metonic 19-year cycle that repeats itself. And we do know that the royal family has been going through so many changes, and especially in the last couple of years since, tropically you can say Uranus crossed into Taurus, but, I like to say it's also because Queen Elizabeth her sun tropically is at 0 degrees of Taurus. Vedically, it would be at 7 degrees of Aries. So it doesn't really matter. Uranus crossed over her sun. So the Uranus transit, in her chart, and also the fact that, Prince Charles's chart also has his moon at 0 at that same degree. So that really calls for the change in the royal family. So I just would watch Prince William over the next year and see what happens with him.
Well,
that a major transition is going to affect his family, but it could affect him and maybe Charles maybe he becomes the king.
Well, that's
maybe
what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that perhaps this is perhaps the queen. She's 92, 93. She's not going to live forever. Perhaps something happens to the queen, and the new king has to be assigned. And I think it could very well be Prince William, because I think Prince Charles is not in the running, right? Because he stepped out in a way because he married. Or is that true? Is he still in the running for the king?
Oh, no, he's still in the running. It's just that Prince William, because he's going to be affected by this eclipse,
right.
I think that's going to kind of be a very important factor for him this year. He's June 21st also. And we were talking about Elizabeth Warren's birthday is June 21st, but his birthday is June 21st, and he was born on an eclipse because he was born in 1982.
So what would that look like? What would that look like? Would Prince Charles then say, "I'm going to abdicate the throne and turn it over to William"?
He could.
Yeah.
Sure. He could do that, yeah. Or it could just mean it's affecting William in terms of his family. I mean, when you have an eclipse that hits you or that hits something in your chart, and I always tell people just look, if it's hitting a degree of a planet in your chart or an angle or even what house it's in, it's not necessarily only affecting you, but it affects somebody in your family. So the June 21st eclipse, for instance, like I said, it started already, the effects of it with the North Node conjoining that degree April 25th. And I was kind of looking at that, and what happened around exactly that time was Elizabeth's brother died.
Right. I remember that very well. And that's sort of when we were at a peak of some sort. I mean, the peak had yet to arrive, I suppose, but we were deeply in the thick of it. At that point in April, most people were feeling very dire because we were all stuck inside. We were very, very careful about doing anything, and things were not. We were in a very unfortunate state for the whole country at that point. And this pandemic was rolling across the country. New pockets are popping up in areas where we hadn't expected them to, especially around the meat plants and stuff like that. All these things were starting to bubble up. It was like, wow, what is going on here? This is not constrained simply to the east or west coast. This is going to be moving across the country.
Right. So I think that what's going to happen, I mean, personally, with the retrogrades is, retrogrades mean that things sort of slow up. Okay,
right.
Things are very close to the Earth; they slow up. I work a lot with Venus retrograde, so once Venus, kind of has its heliacal rising and passes the conjunction, it has a morning star quality, which is a more kind of aggressive quality. And these retrogrades now, I mean, remember that Jupiter and Saturn always retrograde every year.
Right.
It's the fact Mars and Venus are the irregular ones. So the fact that we're having all of them together, I think it means that things are slowing up, and I think it means that we think we're okay, and then Jupiter is going to go direct in September, Saturn's going to go direct in September, and Mars is going to go retrograde in September. So that Mars, I mean, it's going to affect the election, and it's going to be a crazy time, and Mercury is going to be on the South Node, Ketu, is going to be exactly on the eclipse degree of the December 14th total solar eclipse, September 30th. So those 2 days, Saturn goes direct September 29th, 30th. So I would always say to watch it in September, especially towards the end of September, because those degrees, the degree of the eclipse, is, going to be a very, very, very powerful one. And then that's going to have that span of eclipse is going to be from September 30th till December 14th. And in that span, we're going to have Jupiter-Pluto coming back, hitting the Saturn-Pluto. So I'm a little bit nervous about the fall season. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to have to do with COVID. I mean, I've been looking at the fall season for a year or so and thinking something intense is going to happen. The election is going to cause a lot of unrest, and I'm a little worried about that.
I am too. I mean, because the division is very real. Now, there's a lot of polarity in the United States, and it's very real. But, it'd be interesting if the election did turn back to, say, the Democrats for some reason, and they got in to repair some of the damage that's been done, they, in essence, ironically, would be making America great again, which is kind of a weird twist.
Well,
you know what I'm saying? If they're restoring the EPA and things like that, that would be making America safe again in some ways.
I don't know, though. I just think whoever, listen, I think our election will be affected. We have Mercury stationing direct on the day of the election.
I know.
That's the same exact thing that happened in 2000 when we had Bush v. Gore. So everybody's been aware of that. All the astrologers have been aware of that. But what didn't happen in 2000 was the Mars retrograde. So even though there was anger, we didn't like run into the streets with guns. You know, we
but
were
now
angry.
people are running into the streets with guns. I know.
Right, that's my point. So that Mars retrograde, which will go direct November 14th. So I do have a feeling we're not going to know the results of the election then either. And if we do know the results, there's going to be a lot of recounting, and each side is going to have its say, because if people don't come out to the polls, each side is going to think that the other side won unfairly. I mean, it's not going to be
it's not going to be a clear-cut win, no. And especially if they do voting by mail, they're going to introduce all kinds of fraud with that regard. But it's the presence of the guns that scare me. When you see the militiamen standing, charging into the halls of the Michigan State Capitol, I mean, if that had been any other group of people, they would have been mowed down. It just is incredible to see this.
I know.
And that's the thing. There's the division that's most scary. When you look back to history, are there any parallels?
Is scary.
Are there any parallels to the
it's very scary.
to Civil War? Are there any parallels to there?
Yeah. But, also when I go back to 1955, 56, because there was all that unrest, between Hungary and the Suez area and Egypt and Vietnam, it makes me think that this is not just America, that other things are going to happen in the world that are going to create this kind of anger and unrest. And I do worry about Mars retrograde periods in general, but now that I see that the Mars retrograde is going to square the Saturn-Pluto degree and
that's even more.
I hope that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, I keep thinking that's going to herald a new era, and that's going to be December 21st, and then, we might see that the Jupiter-Saturn will start to have like a rebuilding, like after the Civil War.
Well, that's what you would expect. That's what Pluto, Pluto tears down and then rebuilds. I don't think we're going to have a real awakening until Saturn and Jupiter begin to conjoin in Aquarius, as westernly, and then by then I think that'll be a major call to be responsible for the planet. But what I find interesting is that as the news trickles out and we see things like meat plants being infected and being the hotspots for the pandemic, and then people now turning to eat fake meat, eating vegetable-based meat products, whatever you want to call them, fake meat. That to me is indicative of what environmentalists have been calling for years, saying we eat too much meat. The cows are chewing up. They're not a healthy path forward.
Right.
So these things are all coming to light through the nature.
Yeah, personally, that doesn't bother me. I don't eat red meat, so for me, it's like, okay, so I don't eat meat. I mean, I don't eat it anyway.
Right.
But I do realize there are a lot of people that are attached to their meat. So.
Well, I think it's sort of the sort of the things that the environmentalists have been clamoring for. These clean air, the lack of pollution, less meat, are all coming. They're all sort of byproducts of what we're going through right now. The pandemic has brought those as being necessary and positive byproducts of what we're going through. So I think that's very revealing.
Right. It happens after anything that has to do with Pluto or the nose.
Right.
I mean, it's very important, and that's why I think after 9/11, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happened after 9/11 that we might not be too happy about, like the Afghan War.
Oh, right. Or the Iraq
but
War.
It did sort of. Yeah, and a lot of hatred as well. I mean, distrust of Muslims, just like here in the beginning, there was distrust of Chinese, and it's crazy, the kind of things that you start to envision and act out. But I think it does. I think in the end, it brings people together.
I do too. And that's always been my great. That's always been my great hope, was that we may have to go through some rough times, but if it brings us to a place where we're operating and together and not against each other, then I think it's worth the struggle.
So the thing that when I look at all the charts, obviously I haven't done the leaders charts for every country, but like I was saying about Queen Elizabeth and the Uranus on her sun and Charles's moon a few years ago, which really started the whole dynamic changing, with Meghan and Harry and what's happened with that. But I think the other thing is that, when we had that major eclipse in 2017 in August, and everybody was talking about, it's on Donald Trump's ascendant and something's going to happen to Donald Trump. And, I kept saying, well, here's the thing that I do personally, is I look at the leader of a country as representing the country.
Right. That's
so
the right thing.
I don't have to worry about the timing of the Declaration of Independence. I do the chart for Trump. I did the chart for Obama, for Bush. And I look at that, and I look at it in two ways. In one way, you look at the person as a person, private person, but you also look at it as representing the country. And what happened after that eclipse in August 2017 was we had all those floods. We had major, major hurricanes, major floods all over the place. And when I do this, I also look at what's called the eclipse path. And that eclipse path in that summer went right through all of those places. Mm-hmm. Now, we are having an eclipse, let's say June 21st. The eclipse path, as it did in December, goes right through India, Hong Kong, China. So, again, we are watching China. I mean, this is an area we are looking at. We're looking at India. We're looking at Thailand. We're looking at China, Hong Kong. And I think that this is also going to bring in many more. I think maybe it could be a recurrence. It could just be, wars with China in terms of trade wars and things like that. But the one in December, the upcoming one, even going beyond this summer, and again, the important thing about eclipses is that they bring things to light.
Right.
They bring
Right.
things
Mm-hmm.
out in the open.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I think this June and July, I mean, especially June, when you go until June 5th, the America birthday, we have that eclipse on America's birthday, and that is going to be a major shifting, I think, in the way we are going to look at what's happening now. And I think, like I say, I worry that people are just going to run to the beaches, enjoy the summer, and then that Mars is going to.
And then the winter is going to come with a vengeance. When I look back to the eclipses, the eclipse of the Great American Eclipse of 2017, the path was right across the center of the United States from west to east.
Exactly.
I always thought that was very symbolic of sort of the division that was being sown at the time, and that we see now. It was sort of a precursor, a sneak preview of what was to happen. And then the next eclipse coming up in 2024 runs north to south, and that's sort of across the United States, and that's sort of, again, a divisionary thing. So the concept of division and the concept of, where does this country go? We have such widely diverse ideas, and it's sort of really symbolic of what could happen.
Yeah, and I think for me the point was that eclipse did not affect the president personally, but it did affect the where that eclipse path was, going right through where Houston was. It affected Puerto Rico. It went through Florida, the Bahamas. It went through actually that whole area. And I think that is the thing that is most important to remember. And that's why I think when you do these eclipse paths, they are really of the solar eclipse. It's very, very, very important because you can see where some of that energy is going. But the one on December 14th, the reason that eclipse interests me is, of course, because it's directly affecting, Donald Trump because, it's 6 months after June 14th, which is
right.
His
That's
birthday.
his birthday, yeah.
So it means that, whichever system you use, if you use the tropical zodiac, the solar eclipse, very tight, again, a close solar eclipse because the sun and moon are at 23 Sag, Mercury is 20, and the south node is 19. If you're doing Vedic, they're all at 29 Scorpio, which is, again, the same kind of thing. Mercury 26, Ketu is 25. But they're on his sun, because his sun is 22, because it's June 14th and December 14th. So I worry about him. I worry about his health because it's affecting his son, but it affects the country again because he's the representative. And the South Node, which starts that eclipse pattern, is going to be at that degree at the end of September. So, I think that's the thing that I, get just a little bit concerned with because of the fact that his son, he was born on an eclipse.
I know that,
So he was born on a total lunar eclipse. So that means that the node is 2 degrees away from his sun. So he is going to be going through, I think personally, a very difficult period this fall, obviously election. I always wondered if he was going to run. I keep wondering if something is going to happen to his health in September. I don't wish that on him at all. But I think that's why I think also the coronavirus might come back in droves because, or something else going on in the country that's going to upset.
Well,
the
if the
apple
virus
cart.
comes back, if the virus comes back, it's going to affect the economy, and the economy is having a bad economy is the president's worst nightmare. And at the same time, don't forget that he's got a court case pending in the Supreme Court about his income tax returns. There's a lot of things that could come to light. One of the reasons he's so desperate to be reelected is because he knows if he doesn't get reelected, he's bound for jail almost. I mean, he could easily end up in jail with all the stuff he's been caught doing. So that's a concern for him.
It's interesting. It is interesting. And the other thing that I just find really fascinating is the fact that that eclipse of December 14th, like I said, when you have a solar eclipse that's so tight like that, it's a solar total.
Yeah.
Total eclipse December 14th. It's a week before the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, but the exact conjunction. But in that eclipse chart, if you draw a chart for that eclipse, the Jupiter and Saturn are already very close to each other. So in a way, it is kind of giving you that idea that this is, like the heralding of something new.
Right.
And I think, and it's interesting because of the fact that, I just always wonder if who we think is going to run. I mean, it might not be Trump, it might not be Biden. I keep thinking, and again, this is just what I'm reading into the chart, and it's not because I wish any of them wouldn't run.
Of course not. You're just
reporting
what you're seeing. Yeah.
I wonder. Yeah, I just wonder if that election and through the inauguration is what we think we're gonna get is what we're gonna get. You know what I mean? So
right.
And that's America. I mean, other countries we might have the same issues, the same craziness. I mean, it's going to affect. I mean, this pandemic has also affected, how Britain was supposed to, go through Brexit. I mean, everything has been held up. Everything is slowed down.
Well, yeah.
And again, these retrogrades do that. They slow everything down.
Well, what concerns me is that I'm surprised that we're not hearing more news out of India because of their problems with overpopulation and the spread of this disease.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they are immune to it. Why aren't we hearing staggering numbers out of India? Because they, in many ways, just because of the proximity of people and the way they live, how could they possibly avoid this not spreading like wildfire, regardless of how much lockdown there is?
Because Modi has been, I think, very aggressive in terms of that lockdown.
But how do you how do you lock down ghettos? How do you lock down shanty towns? How do you lock down?
Well, you get, I mean, it's very. I mean, I don't know. I'm not there, and I haven't been reading as much as I probably should. But I think it could be very well the kind of thing that happened during the British occupation, that they really had the police in all of these places really kind of assert themselves. Doesn't mean they're clubbing people to death or anything like that. It just means that they are asserting their authority.
Right, but how do you practice social distancing? How do you practice 6 feet apart and masks for that many people, 1.2 billion people?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's not every single place, though, is, has everybody living on top of each other. I mean,
no, I
have
understand.
Villages. I mean, It is a worry. I mean, China has a large population too, and they were affected, but it took them a while. It will be interesting with India to see what the actual figures are. But Modi has, I think, really kind of been very, good about sort of the lockdown and being very careful. And people do like him and they respect him. Whatever your political thing is as a whole. I mean, he's been elected a few times. So I think somehow people are, and they're very scared, of course, the poorer, areas. They're
right.
the ones that are still going out because they don't have any kind of fallback.
There's no fall. There's no safety net
difficult.
Whatsoever. That's what concerns me. That's why I was wondering why it hadn't wreaked havoc there. That's what I would have thought. But, because they're in a much different spot than we are. They're much closer to the ground, as far as their lifestyle and the way they live. It's much more of an agrarian society in large parts of the country. I was just wondering why we hadn't heard more about what it'd be like there. I thought it would be an explosion there, but who knows?
Yeah, but I think it was because Modi was very, 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 direct and authoritative, and really issued that lockdown a lot more than I think here. And also, it's not like, okay, here we have all the governors, so it's like some states wanted, so basically it was up to all the governors. You have 50 states, so, each state you had a different attitude. You do have different states in India, too, by the way.
Right.
But it doesn't seem to be that it was, that people objected to it as much. Although, again, it's like getting the news. Are we getting the news? Are we really getting this?
Well, it could very well be covered up. You're right. That could be a real problem.
I don't know. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have no idea. But
and we don't know this. We don't know the numbers out of China either. I mean, I have my acupuncturist that I go to said that when she was growing up in China, they would always falsify the numbers. There were huge earthquakes, and they'd say
Right.
300 people died. She said it was 300,000 people died. So, you had to be there, I guess, your
Right.
feet in the ground to see what's happening. So,
Right.
I can't
Well,
imagine.
it reminds me of when we were kids and we grew up with the Vietnam War in our face, and it was like, oh yeah, there was this big battle. Like 20 Americans died and 4,000 Viet Cong died. Or
right.
something like
I know.
that,
It's never, we don't know who's telling the truth.
It's just,
And the
I
thing
don't
is
think
that
any country
when you talk about events being a little bit dicey, and what does that look like, and you think about the president, and you think about everything else, it could very well be an economy whereby we have the pandemic drops down this veil of isolation on us all, and the economy comes to a screeching halt, and there's like a tipping point with the economy where you can't recover. Supposing this was the beginning of the great another second depression, with 25% of the people unemployed, what would that look like? How would people be taken to the streets? You'd have to have soup kitchens,
If you go back to 2008, 2009, and you look at the Jupiter cycle and the same signs, I think what happens is, first of all, even if you're using the tropical zodiac, if you look at Aquarius, it's still the traditional ruler is Saturn. So you still have Jupiter and Saturn in a Saturn sign. And then you start to go down, you go towards 2022, and Jupiter goes into Pisces. So I think what is going to happen is it mirrors the 2008, 2009 12-year cycle.
Right.
Is you're going to get this year and next year, rebuilding, and then 2022, you start to get, great again, and you start to invest again, and the real estate market picks up again. But I mean, right now is not that much different. Of course, it's different, and the figures are greater. It's more like a depression than a recession. But those cycles, that Jupiter cycle, is also telling, in terms of the economy and how it's going to, I think, rebuild. I mean, I've been telling people, if you can buy a house or buy something, go buy it now or next year, because then it's, this is the best time to buy, really.
Well, right, because and of course, if people are losing their jobs and they're going to go into foreclosure, their houses are going to be available. They'll have to sell them at fireplace, fire, whatever you call it, fire sale, just to get rid, to unload them and bail them out of their mortgages, which means it's a buying opportunity for people who have money at the time. And of course, it just, people who have the money will be able to buy the properties and then turn them over when the economy comes back. Which again, then of course that points out the whole economic disparity that's going on all the time anyway.
Well, that's what happens though with the Jupiter Saturn. I mean, it really does start a new cycle like that, and it's a whole rebuilding, of what's to come. And I do think that's why, when you look at this as mirroring 2001. Right. I mean, when I was looking at this year, I wasn't necessarily predicting a terrorist attack. I didn't.
I wasn't. No,
predict
but
the
I knew something
pandemic
was
either.
going to happen. Right. We knew some
But
sort of major
something
change.
was going to happen.
Yeah, major
Right.
change.
And there's still things that are going to happen. I don't think that the pandemic is the entire story. I think that when you're looking around the world, we're going to see a lot more political unrest. Just if I mirror Jupiter, Pluto from 55, 56, those years, I don't know. I could be completely wrong, but
I think there's a lot of potential for it. You look what's going on in Brazil, for example. You look what's going on in Hungary. You look what's going on in Turkey. You look what's going on in Russia. All these countries, and China is really spreading their wings. China is becoming the world's, big brother. They're going and building railroads for the people and dams and stuff like that all through Africa. They're building a Trans-Siberian Railroad that's going to benefit other people. They're sinking lots of money into foreign countries, and they're going to get, a payback at some point. They're going to require that, and so they're spreading their influence far and wide. So it may be a reordering of the world order, whereby we are no longer the top dog, the one to look to. We still may have the strongest economy, but we don't know. If we go through a depression, all bets are off.
Right.
But I don't think it's going to be a war. I think it's going to be a war on the environment. I think it's going to be a war, quote-unquote war, but a war on the environment more than anything else. That's what I really think the signs are that I see. This is an environmental war that we have to fight back. And the good news about that is that it affects us all equally. So we are all invested, as opposed to, nation against nation. This is planet Earth binding together to repair the planet. That's what I would think. That's my naive, optimistic hope for. So it's interesting.
Well, I think you have to be optimistic and hopeful, because otherwise, you might as well just turn
That's
around.
true. You might as well just.
There is a lot of people though who are suffering out there, and I do feel. In terms of not just physical illness, but mental illness and isolation, and it's very tough. And
I agree.
I think the more that maybe we can all do, or people can do to help out and just be there with, I think that's really important.
That's huge.
Especially,
huge.
I
So
think the
I mean,
isolation is
and
very hard.
we've been through a lot in everybody's lives, and we always manage to come out ahead. Humans are very adaptable, and I think there's great hope. But I think it's important to have these dates in mind, and for people to be cognizant of what's going on in the background, because it is sort of a weather report of sorts of what could be or what could portend, and to be informed is to be forearmed is to be forewarned, and so when we are forewarned, we've got that going for us. So I think that's worthwhile. Anyway, we've run out of time, as I knew we would. It's a great conversation. We could go on forever, but. My guest today has been Ronnie Dreyer. She's an astrologer out of New York City, does Vedic, and she also does Western astrology, but her Vedic is really her real area of expertise. You've got a wonderful website with lots of books and interesting webinars that are on there. I encourage you to follow her on Facebook or wherever. Ronnie Dreyer is her name, RonnieDreyer.com. RonnieDreyer.com. So, Ronnie, thank you so much for coming on today. It's always great to get your insights and to know what we see coming down the road at us is really it's important for us to be aware of it. So, I appreciate you coming on today. And very good to talk to you. And hope you're staying well and safe.
You too, and everybody out there, please stay well and safe, and still be careful during the summer. Remember, we're heading into a crazy fall season.
I know, and that's and I think that we should not let our guard down. Was the one thing I would say. Don't think we're out of the woods yet. We're not. I think it's we've got more to come. So we've just seen the first act. Okay, very good. Thanks so much, Ronnie. Take care. Be good. Bye bye.
Sure. Thank you.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.